a playlist original.
It is now 7:06. You have exactly 8 hours and 54 minutes to ponder the error of your ways. Any questions?
Yeah. Does Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe?
A brain, a beauty, a jock, a rebel, and a recluse.
Can't believe this is really happening to me.
Before this day is over, they'll break the rules.
Chicks cannot hold their smoke. That's what it is.
Bare their souls.
I'm a nymphomaniac.
Are your parents aware of this?
Take some chances.
Being bad feels pretty good, huh?
And touch each other in a way they never dreamed possible.
Why'd you do that?
Because I knew you wouldn't.
The Breakfast Club. They only met once,
I don't want to be alone anymore.
You don't have to be.
but it changed their lives forever.
Man, I consider you guys my friends. I'm not wrong, am I?
Universal Pictures presents Emilio Estevez, Paul Gleason, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, and Ali Sheedy in a John Hughes film.
Why are you being so nice to me? Because you're letting me.
The Breakfast Club.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another anniversary episode of Back to the Blockbuster with your hosts, Gaius and Jackson. Today, celebrating the 40th anniversary of The Breakfast Club from 1985. This was your guys' pick left over from February. We are in early March now as of recording. And for those that might be watching as opposed to listening, I am in a little bit of a different background today. It's because I have just gone through a move. Hence the little delay in getting this episode out. So thank you for bearing with me. And Gaius, thank you too for reallocating your schedule to wait for me to get all moved in before we do this episode. But I'm all settled in now. About a week off this watch. Loved it and very excited to dive into the anniversary today. Why don't you tell us, Gaius, just for the listeners maybe that haven't seen it, or if it's been a while, let us know what The Breakfast Club is all about. I can't wait to. This is a movie I've been really looking forward to chat about.
Yeah, I'm really excited too, and I'm so glad that you guys picked it as your listeners' pick, because I would have chosen it myself, but I actually chose Scream 3 for another reason, because we wanted Mark on and all that. But we rarely get to talk about John Hughes on here. I guess we've kind of done it a little bit where you've talked about how you saw Ferris Bueller like for the first time like on the show and all that. But
Right.
We've never really gotten to go into detail about one of his movies, and this is spoiler alert, my favorite movie of his. So like when it comes to rating it later, it'll probably be obvious what I give it. But it still stands out as that. But as far as what the movie is about, it's a teen coming of age comedy drama film written, produced, and directed by John Hughes. It stars Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, Ali Sheedy, and Paul Gleason. The film tells the story of 5 teenagers from different high school cliques who serve a Saturday detention overseen by their authoritarian vice principal. The movie premiered on February 15th, 1985, grossed $51.5 million worldwide against a $1 million budget. It earned great acclaim from critics who consider it to be one of Hughes' most memorable and recognized works. However, because of the whole Brat Pack moniker at the time, the actors in the movie felt some kind of way during that period about being labeled as such with that name. We can go into that a little bit. It's really interesting because they continue, I guess, to have certain feelings about it. I think when Andrew McCarthy released that documentary about the Brat Pack and how they all kind of dealt with it, like some of that got liberated for them a bit, but they definitely over the years, beginning in the 80s when that article was written, they really felt some kind of way about it because it gave the impression that they weren't really actors, that they were just kind of like young people who partied and didn't really care about their craft. And from all the interviews I've read, that wasn't the case. They seemed to really care about their craft, and they were pretty good actors, all of them, for the most part. So interesting things to get into. I wondered, this is interesting because I feel like the movie is what surprised me about the movie when I first saw it. And I was a teenager when I first saw it. It was the first John Hughes movie I saw as a teenager.
Same here for both of those things. It is a seminal movie to watch as a teenager.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, because I was growing up, like, and we covered a lot of them. We had a lot of 90s teen movies, right? And I was like, okay, those would be more relatable to me because at least I closer, in that age range to understand what they're going through. So I didn't expect to feel as much when I saw this movie, because I was like, it was the 80s, and what can I relate to the teenagers from the 80s? And from that first viewing into every viewing I've had since to this most recent one, I am still amazed by how what John Hughes was able to do as a writer. He seemed to be able to tap into youth culture and not really just 80s youth culture. Like his writing seemed to be universal, and
Yes.
someone that was a teenager when I was a teenager and someone that was a teenager when you were can still understand fully what all these characters are going through, and it hits home in a big way. I remember when I first saw it, like watching with a group of friends, it felt like we were going through some like group therapy session with them a bit, and I was surprised by how like poignant it was and continues to be. So that was one of the things that stands out to me, which is why I'm so glad everyone picks it, because it seems like I haven't come across anyone that hasn't liked it. Like I've never met anyone that's like, oh, I don't really care for that movie. They may not think it's great, but they still think it's good. I've never met anyone that said like, oh, that movie just isn't my thing. So I think there's a reason for that, and that a lot of that has to do with John Hughes and his writing, and then also a group of actors who really nailed their characters and understood those characters like completely. So that's kind of like
absolutely
intro to how I feel about the movie bit.
Yeah, same here. So I can't remember exactly how old I was. It was like early Netflix era, because that was like before I was really collecting DVDs. But I'd heard clearly a lot about this movie as I was sort of getting into film and whatnot when I was still a young lad. And so this is one that I watched early, and I'm really glad, because as I mentioned when like last year when we were chatting about Ferris Bueller, that was my first watch of that movie well into my 20s, and I mentioned how I really wish I had experienced that movie while I was still coming of age and as a younger person. But I'm glad that I did get The Breakfast Club in when I did. And this was probably my third or fourth watch of it. And it had been a few years since I'd seen it, which led to me choosing it as one of our listeners' picks. But to echo your point, it's not often that when this movie does come up in a group of friends, whether I'm talking with friends of mine that we're discussing movies, or if it's a pack of friends of mine that aren't as into film, generally everyone has seen it or is very familiar with it, and like you mentioned, really does enjoy this movie. It is absolutely timeless. But it was great. What I'm excited to get into today is I hadn't seen this movie. I don't think I've seen it in my 20s yet, or if I did, it was like early 20s. But I did have a very different perspective of this movie while watching it. I related to different characters than I had when I had last watched it, and I thought that was interesting. I'm interested to see if you agree or if you still feel the same. But watching this movie as a teenager, I think naturally I related more to the high school age characters in the movie. But while watching it this time, I found myself relating to the vice principal, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, and even Carl, the janitor.
Richard Vernon played as the character played by Paul Gleason.
Yeah, very much like the movie's like antagonist. But now watching it a week ago, I sort of related to his character more, instead of looking at him as just the movie villain that I probably would have looked at him as when I was a teenager watching this. Like every character feels really well developed, and you understand why they are the way they are. And I just didn't appreciate that, I don't think, when I'd seen this movie while I was younger. So it's great that 40 years later, the movie's still giving me something after I haven't seen it for a few years. And that's what I love about, every great movie that we discuss here, is that it wasn't the same watch that it was the last time I saw it. And that's what I really appreciated this time around. But how many times have you seen it, and when was the last time you saw The Breakfast Club?
Dude, I've seen this movie so many times. I wish I could like name them. I've seen it a lot.
Yeah.
But I think the last time I watched it was maybe a couple years ago.
Okay, nice.
With a friend who actually hadn't seen it, had seen like 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink and Ferris Bueller, but had never seen this. And I was always I was like, how do you miss this one? Like in that,
my girlfriend hadn't seen this either. I wanted to watch it with her, but we never got, the schedules weren't lining up. But I was disappointed about that.
Yeah, and I feel the same way you do. I feel differently every time I watch it. Like I identify with someone different every time I watch it. I think there are certain characters that, like, when I first saw it a long time ago, that I was like, oh, like very much not relatable, become a bit more relatable when you're watching it. I think that what some of the actors are doing is a lot more, they should get a lot more credit for maybe than they probably did at the time, and continue to do so. And I kind of got that impression when I was like reading articles and watching behind the scenes stuff about the movie, and how, particularly like using the example like Claire Molly Ringwald's performance and
Mhm.
character, is that because of who Molly Ringwald was at the time, and how she looked and how she could easily be like the pretty kind of prissy stuck up girl, is that
Mhm.
that role wasn't hard for her, that it was easy for her to play. And Ali Sheedy in the interview was saying that like Molly Ringwald was 16 when they made it, and that she, even though she comes off that way, is that she was way more intuitive than any one of them in that room. Like they said that like she was basically 30 years old, but like 16, and
Right.
that she understood that character, but understood how to get into more of the nuance of the character, which is why that character becomes more, I think, a lot more better as the movie progresses, where you learn a lot more about her, that even though like she's the pretty popular one, that I think what's true about all of them is that they all have issues, and no matter what kind of
Right.
social standing they are in, that they all have a little something that makes them like that they're all going through, I guess. But
Exactly.
you know, Judd Nelson said too, like with her character, that she seemed to be the one that was kind of tarred the most as being like, oh, this is so much like her in real life. It's not really acting, and they were all that couldn't be any
Really.
further from the truth. So when I watched it, knowing that, it made her performance a lot better. And then there's certain performances like I think Ali Sheedy probably has like the hardest role, because like she doesn't really get to do much until like she's so weird in the beginning and she doesn't really
She
talk
does a
much,
lot with by
and
doing a little.
little, but then by the time that she does become like vocal and a part of the group, she gets to do so much in a small amount of time that makes you understand that character too. And it was just like those things I appreciated more with this watch, where I was like, oh, like like when I first saw it, I was like, oh, she didn't have a lot to do, and I kind of like disregarded her character. But like, no, she
Mm.
has plenty to do, like during a pretty pivotal moments on the movie towards the end, where they all kind of like break out of their shell a bit. And like I said, it does become like the tension becomes like group therapy, and then while you're watching it, you feel like you're going through it with them a bit. Um, and I'm so amazed by how powerful it is. Still, I'm like so amazed by
Yeah.
how realistic it is, and how like, oh, that's so identifiable even today. And
Hmm.
I think kids now, like I think my brother watched this movie like maybe 5 years ago, so he was in his early 20s, and he really loved it. Wish that he could have watched it as a teenager, because they probably
Right.
would have like he said it would have helped him a lot as a teenager, knowing that like some of the stuff that he was going through, that like there was something out there that he could have watched that would have helped him understand that. And I thought that was a really honest thing to say.
Hmm.
And I don't know if maybe you have an opinion about John Hughes, but like, why do you think he was so able to tap into youth culture, even though he wasn't a teenager anymore? I mean, I guess it's something you don't forget, but he was very much able to identify with like that age group to the point where he created some of the defining movies of that generation that still hold up today. And I was wondering why you thought that was the case.
Well, I do think that I'm not sure how old he was when this came out. I think he was only in his 20s, because he died fairly young at what, like 51 in 2009, I want to say.
Yeah, 59 in 2009. Yeah, so
Oh, he was 59.
pretty
Okay.
still pretty
Still
young.
fairly young. And I'm not even sure what he died from, but well before his time. And he pumped out 8 movies in a span of 7 years. So he was quite busy, especially in the all but one of his movies came out in the 80s. So I think especially his first 4 movies, which I haven't seen 16 Candles or Weird Science, but I'm still well aware of 16 Candles' impact as like
Right.
a teen movie of the 80s. My mom is always going on about that movie and Molly Ringwald. So it's a shame that I haven't seen it. But I did get her a copy of the DVD years ago for us to set aside and watch someday. But between that and The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's, and I don't have much to say about Weird Science because I haven't seen it, but I have seen it pop up in many lists about the 80s and young adult movies. So I'm thinking
Yeah.
that at that time in his life and as a writer of his own movies, he still probably had a lot, maybe angst or experiences from his own days as a youth that he wanted to share. And I think that when we see directors that write their own movies, I think those are always more poignant when instead of directing somebody else's work, you're able to
Yeah.
get so much more across when you are putting your own words to screen. So I think that helps his movies in that regard. But I'm not sure. I don't know much about his life as a young person or what he was going on in the early to mid 80s about John Hughes, but undoubtedly he was the guy in that genre of young adult movies, teen movies of the 80s. Like, I don't think anybody else really comes close to him in that era, but his movies are
I don't think so
undeniable
either.
and long lasting. Ferris Bueller, I already can't wait to get that rewatch, and it'll probably be sooner than later now that I'm high off the rewatch of The Breakfast Club. But I will take the time someday to find out what exactly it is. I know that a lot of The Breakfast Club was influenced from his high school stories that he had from those days, and even like the name of the movie comes from like the unofficial name of like Saturday Detention at his high school, which I think was in Ohio. But that's about all I know about John Hughes. But he was doing something right, and it's a shame. I wish he'd put out a little bit more, but because he stopped directing 18 years before his death, I don't know what the story is there. But he is one of my favorites, and definitely, yeah. Do you know anything about that, or?
I don't know anything about that. I mean, unless like he was just so like maybe the 80s was just like his time,
wheelhouse?
Like that he like his wheelhouse that he, and also like you said, he cranked out a lot of movies in a short amount of time. So could have been like he might have been burnt out, but he did write a lot of like signature stuff. I mean, even like not even as a director. I mean, he he has a hand in Home Alone. He wrote that. I mean, like there's a lot of stuff that he didn't even touch as a director that he wrote. And very influential and like kind of breaking a lot of younger actors back in the day. Like we talked about Molly, everyone in this movie, but then you look at like Matthew Broderick, Macaulay Culkin with Home Alone. There's a lot of like stuff that he has had his hand in and was very influential. And I know that with this movie, they all spoke very fondly of working with him, and some of them worked with him more than one. I mean, Molly Ringwald did, and I know of all the people that have done his movies and have talked about it in the years since, she seems to have the most issues with the stuff that they were doing back then. Not that she didn't like it, but I think like I guess when you watch The Breakfast Club, there's lines that are thrown her way that wouldn't fly today.
Oh man, that was one thing that I noticed that I didn't consider when I'd watched this before. Is like there's some borderline wrong or controversial things in this movie that would not fly today.
There's a whole sequence where Bender is like kind of like throwing out the whole like about necessarily about her being fat, and there's that whole dialogue exchange, and like that seems pretty like probably wouldn't go over well especially when you're 16 years old. And I know she feels certain ways about showing, like she's showing her kids. I think it took her forever to show her kids this movie and most of those movies from that era because we didn't live it, so I guess it's really different for us because we were just watching these movies. But there was a lot of I think they seem to be a lot of hostility, I guess, not towards like John Hughes or anything, just towards like what these movies became and what it did for their careers. And you'll talk to other people who think that it's kind of like selfish of them to kind of get all hung up on like, well, like because of like all this other stuff, like these kind of movies didn't help my career as I got older. But on the other hand, you wouldn't have had a career without a lot of these movies. So there's that notion. So I think it's kind of hard to really not be upset with like how they feel about being in these movies personally. But it does give a little like, even though they hated being called the Brat Pack, but there is that kind of like when you hear people that are young who are like, I want to be taken seriously as an actor. Of course, I guess you should. It is your craft, right? But I think even now some of them would be like, well, maybe like even though they do feel some kind of way about it, I just wonder if like maybe they're like maybe we should have like lightened up a little bit about that period in our lives and just enjoy that we were a part of like these movies that kind of defined a culture. Now, this movie in particular was successful when it came out, really successful, and a lot of those 80s movies were. But I wonder if a lot of these movies you didn't really feel how culturally important they were going to be until maybe years later, even though they were successful at the time. Like maybe if they were just like movies that they did and then they moved on to the next one. I don't know if they feel the way like we feel about them watching them. A lot of that can change in the moment. And then like, it's like 5 or 6 years later that you're like, oh, this movie is still resonating. And then it's 20 years later and they're like, oh, it's still resonating. And it's 25 and 30. And then you kind of get how important it is. So I don't know like what it was like for them then with it being as successful as it was and whether or not it continuing to stay around really is something that defined its success more the longer it kind of was like in the pop culture lexicon of like movies of this type.
Right. Well, especially in Molly Ringwald's case, I completely understand her reservations about, and I can't speak for her other movies. I think this is really the only performance of hers that I have seen like from that era. But just like after doing some background research, like I wouldn't be surprised. Like I don't think some things that happened to her character or her as an actress in this movie would fly today, or if they did, like we would be hearing about it. Like her being, there's like what, a 5-year age gap between her and Judd Nelson's character, and like he is tormenting her throughout the movie, like you said, body shaming, like sexualizing her. And I think I think it's a double in the scene where he goes under the desk to hide from the vice principal, and he like puts his face between her legs, and it shows like her that panty shot, which I don't think it's actually Molly Ringwald, but it's still her character. Like on screen, it's her. So like I don't blame her at all for not wanting, being maybe embarrassed or reserved about showing her children that, and what else comes with being in this movie, like just the abuse that her character goes through. Just to what I found one of the biggest takeaways that I took from this movie, and I didn't forget it by any means, like that her, spoiler alert for those that haven't seen it, like our anniversary episodes are full of these, but at the end of the story, she begins a relationship with Bender, despite all the awful things that he does to her throughout the movie, as if it's sort of forgiven or brushed aside because she understands how damaged he is. Like, I think that is a very like mishandled aspect of this movie. Like, I don't think that, maybe because it was in vogue at the time.
Yeah.
I think that kind of does a disservice to her character in this movie, that she would choose to be with a character like that, despite all the things that he put her through in this movie. Like, it just seemed I didn't get behind it as I probably did in earlier watches of this movie. I thought that was and I think as time's gone on, that's been a point of contention for some viewers in this movie, is how their characters end up. But it does lead to that iconic shot of Judd Nelson, like fist pumping. That's like, been an iconic shot in movie cinema or movie history.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But did you feel any? Once I discovered too, like there was a 5-year age gap. She's 16. He's like 21 or 22. Filming that, that just screamed like icky to me. But
yeah, it is. It did a bit to me too. Now I was trying to understand that there's 16-year-old like me or you, and there's 16-year-old like I'm an actor, and like they are. I think they carry themselves a bit older and they act more mature,
sure.
And like, and I from what I know is that even though they were like different age group, like Anthony Michael Hall was pretty young too. They all really vibed really well together. It wasn't like they weren't really on set together being like, well, I'm the older one, and like, I can't really associate you because you're younger. I think they all kind of had because of the industry they're in, they kind of all had common ground in that regard. So I try to think of it that way, but then I do agree with you. It is pretty, there's that one, I think that's one line he says to Emilio Estevez character. He's like, should we get the prom queen impregnated? And it implies that like it implies that, that is really bad too. And I agree with you too about how they end up together. Now there is something in the writing towards the end where it's almost like he's getting a rise out of her for her to finally like kind of like stand up for herself a bit. And it's like a subtle moment between them where it's like, oh, I see what the intention was there and why maybe she like finally gets him and they get each other.
Right.
But it's like too subtle. It was subtle enough for me to get like, I know what he's trying to do. And I think in that scene, in that moment where like they kind of have their last little breakdown where they've yelled at each other, and I think I forgot what she says, but like he looks at her after she was trying to admit something, I guess, about her parents or whatever, and she has one more line where he looks at her and she says it, and he kind of looks at her like, okay, now you understand like what I'm trying to do here.
Right.
And I guess it works for that moment. But does it work for they should end up together at the end?
I don't think so. I do completely agree with you that he is tormenting her because she just takes it and doesn't stick up for herself. And by the end, they come to a mutual understanding that they didn't understand each other in the way that they thought they did. But I think that they could have like departed maybe on better terms that would have been, I think, a better conclusion to their characters than them enter this what seemed to me a completely arbitrary relationship that came out of nowhere. I think that maybe is because what 80s audiences wanted to see is like what they determined was a happy ending for those characters.
Yeah.
But to me, it very much felt forced. I think that the dynamic between those characters as the movie goes on was flawless. It really just comes down to the ending and her giving him her earrings and kissing him, and them, assuming they start this relationship is just where I think it goes a little bit too far. Not that it undoes everything that they went through together in detention, but just that it went just a little bit over the line where it really crossed into suspension of disbelief for me.
Yeah. And since we're talking about similar moments like that, not that this moment is as egregious, because like what they've gone through is like, it's pretty like almost silly that she would even be interested in someone that did that to her for an entire Saturday. But the whole Ali Sheedy transformation too at the end, and then her, and her. I mean, I understand that she connects with Andrew though, because like he does have scenes where he comes off much deeper than just being like a typical jock, and she sees that in him, and I love that. I think she has a line where like they're talking about their issues, and she kind of points out like, oh, he cares about what other people think, and like she is very much aware of like what his damage is. So I understood their connection a lot more than Molly Ringwald's and Judd Nelson's, but I think it does ring false that someone like her, considering what we know of her in the movie, would change. And like it also is the wrong message, I think, to deliver, like in order to.
That is exactly what I was going to say, is the message that her transformation sends, and by Andrew noticing her because she
like
does herself up
she's
and
so
looks all
beautiful.
pretty.
Yeah.
Oh, that did not come across good this time around. Like, again, it doesn't undo anything in the movie for me. I still think it's damn near flawless, but that stood out to me now watching it more as an adult than as a teenager.
And now, like, you kind of see where that trope like has been around for so long. Like, you look at movies, like teen movies from the 90s, where like she's all that, like, oh, she's hideous, she wears glasses, and then like she takes her glasses off and like puts her hair down.
Oh, now she's beautiful. Yeah,
suddenly beautiful. Yeah. So like that's been around forever. But it rings entirely false, and I don't think it's the best message. But it can be, I guess, forgiven a little bit, because I do, like I said, like she has like as little time to connect with them compared to like the other actors, and she doesn't like say much for most of the movie. And I think with the amount of time that she is given, she connects at least with him, and then also have a lot to say in that little like circle group therapy session that they're having. Like, she's very intuitive because she is someone that's just observing at first. She is more, I think, intuitive than the rest of them about like what's going on with each person, because she's just had to sit there and watch. So I love the connection that they form, as far as they understand each other. But even when I was a teenager, I was like, that doesn't seem right. like she has to like change who she is in order to like
get his attention. Yeah, exactly.
So I thought that was like something that hasn't aged well, and honestly, the stuff with Molly Ringwald and Bender hasn't aged all that well either. However, it's very well acted. I mean, like I
agreed.
Just knowing that she was that young. I mean, yes, all of them were like young, like, and I think it's unfortunate that like they were kind of labeled as they were and during that time, as if they weren't that good, because I'm thinking about like some of the teen actors from like the 90s, and like we didn't really have a Brat Pack, right? We had people that were in movies together like a couple of times. You have Sarah Michelle Gellar and Ryan Phillippe that do like 2 movies together, and then like Freddie Prinze Jr. and all them do a couple movies together, and we had teen movies. But I think by watching this, even though I love the teen movies from the era I grew up in, like I don't really think that, and I've never really said this before, I don't think our teen movies really touched what they were doing back then, like during the 80s, during this time. Yeah. Like there are some that definitely like they're clever and they're funny, but like I don't think a lot of them are as like poignant and character driven as these were. And they certainly have their moments, but like they, I mean, it also probably helps that like most of these movies were coming from a singular voice back in the 80s.
That I think that is a big contributor of it, and also not that like the teen movies of the 90s were necessarily trying to replicate what the 80s had done, but as audience members, movie watchers, of course, intentional or not, we're going to associate the later period as sort of imitating the prior period, like with the 90s imitating the 80s, whether or not that's intentional.
Right.
And I think you naturally are going to compare like genres, like movies, to what came before. And I think in a lot of cases, what came before, what we consider the originals, outshines imitators. So again, whether or not that was the intention of the creators of 90s teen movies, I think audience members, people like us, are going to associate them as being imitators. And, I think we have an appreciation for what came before, and maybe that leads to why they don't seem as poignant. Maybe it's because if we didn't have the 80s teen movies that we did before the 90s period, maybe we would consider those 90s teen movies, to the regard that we hold the 80s. But who knows? I do think there's a lot of great 90s teen movies, but the period was different. There's different stories, different, societal factors going on.
Things going on. Yeah.
Also, the 80s aesthetic, I think, is a humongous factor in like the enjoyment of those movies. Like before, there was just so much more, I guess, evolving in later years, so many more parts.
Yeah.
Like the 80s just seems so simple that it's just like not stimulus overload when you're watching those movies.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting too, like when you hear about people that, like, I remember watching like a behind the scenes thing on Can't Hardly Wait, and like Seth Green said the reason he wanted to do it because like, it felt like the movies that he grew up watching, which he referenced this one. And I love Can't Hardly Wait, but I'm looking at them like side by side, like, they, again, it's funny and it certainly has moments and I enjoy it, and that probably is different because I did grow up with it, but there is like a distance between like some of the characters in like a movie like that and like a movie like this, where maybe the intention in those teen movies from the 90s wasn't to really get to know any of these people. It was just like to kind of give like broad strokes of who they were, and like some of them are played as a bit as caricatures, some of them are played as a bit of stereotypes. Like you can look at Jennifer Love Hewitt and Can't Hardly Wait, and she's supposed to be like the princess too. And you look at someone like Molly Ringwald in this, and there's much more character depth to Claire than Amanda Beckett and Can't Hardly Wait, even though like the same archetypes are like the same. Like they're trying to make them like similar. And I think I said it is having a singular voice. I don't think there was a singular voice in the 90s writing these movies. For us, everyone was trying to like create their own, like, we're going to be the next John Hughes movie that's going to take off. And just judging from the people who have listened to our show when we cover certain teen movies from that era, like they are popular. There's no denying that the 90s teen movies are popular, but I think there's a lot to be said about having one person be the guy who kind of led that movement and
absolutely
and really understood. I mean, you look at someone like Andrew. I think everyone on that set said that John Hughes was definitely more geek minded. So Anthony Michael Hall's character is much more him than any of them. And, and they thought it'd be harder for him to write someone like Emilio Estevez character in this. But they were surprised that it was a combination of him giving that character a bit more depth, and then also Emilio Estevez, I guess, again, like not stereotyping people. Even though he looked a certain way and could easily been like the kind of like hot actor of his generation, they said that he was also very introspective, very intuitive, always writing on set. Like he was like trying to create things. Like he wanted to be a lot more than what his looks and the perception of him, was meant to be. And I think the combination of how John kind of wrote that character a bit deeper, and like Emilio Estevez playing that character a bit deeper, especially towards the end, made that character relatable. Even to when I was in high school, I was definitely not relating to people who played football and stuff like that. But I remember when I watched it, I was like, I get that guy too, though. Like because there's like you just change like the pressure of succeeding in sports, and then change that to the pressure of succeeding in anything that you're passionate about, and you would get it. And then having the pressure of like your parents might put on you. So, that character ends up even being someone that's universal, even though it doesn't appear like that when you're first watching it.
Yeah, I was actually on rewatch really impressed with the writing behind Andrew, and I think there's like some factors that John Hughes wrote into him that I don't see really echoed in that archetype, like the jock archetype in other movies, that I think I don't know whether it's not people are like other writers of characters in subsequent movies just are trying to do something original that doesn't work, or if they miss the message. But like with Andrew, I think him, and I know that John Hughes intentionally wrote him to not be a football player because he thought that that was just too overdone. So I think that that he's not your typical football jock was a subtle but really important characteristic for Andrew, just being a wrestler. And the fact that he's not like your dumb bully jock. He's actually kind, like sticking up for other people. Obviously, he's
pretty protective. Yeah.
Protective, like of both Brian and Claire, like, and anybody except for obviously he has his rivalry with Bender, who I guess there you get the alpha male tension between the two of them, which is like typical of like your jock character, but played very differently than I think it's been done in other characters that are like Andrew, that he's sticks up for other people, but he's still like not a pushover. He's not, he's got some qualities of like the jock archetype, but just done very differently. And was I kind of forgot some of the nuances of his character while watching that I appreciated when I did this rewatch. Another thing I was really surprised about, I was just curious if, I know you watched it a couple of years ago, so the watch is a little bit more fresh, but let me know if you disagree or not. But what I was really surprised at is how much of a leading performance Judd Nelson had in this movie. I had completely forgot. I kind of thought it was more equal between the five of them. And there's definitely scenes and sequences where, they're really sharing the dialogue and the screen time. But ultimately, like, I think Judd Nelson is the lead in this movie, and the weight of his performance I had really underestimated going into this watch, and I came out really surprised. And also just his performance alone, I think was my far and above my favorite, and I didn't expect that going into it this time. So he really impressed me in this movie.
It is something that goes beyond like a teen movie performance. He's hitting a lot of notes that are like that feels very real and above the material that he was given. And I know what helps all of them is that John Hughes really loved rehearsal time and let them all rehearse. So they got to know each other fairly well and get comfortable with each other. And he also let them, even though he wrote a pretty good script and all that, he let them kind of riff and do their own thing. Judd Nelson said there's one part, I guess it's a scene where Anthony Michael Hall is like smoking the weed and he has that whole like funny exchange with him when he's wearing the sunglasses. He said one, his smile and laugh is genuine because he really thought that Anthony Michael Hall was hilarious. But like he said that John Hughes would just let the film just run, and then like the actors could hear like it almost running out. Like they're like, everyone knows that sound where like film's about to run out. They're like, is he gonna cut? Is he gonna cut? And they were like, he would just let them go. Right. Like, hey, one of these moments might be better than something I wrote, and he just let them do their thing. And I think he let Judd Nelson do a lot of his own thing, and that character probably has the most I wouldn't say nuance, I guess, but like there's a lot more going on there. Like there's a reason.
No, I think it's right.
You're so angry. You're so angry because of what? Like what? Why are you so like? Why are you such a troublemaker? Like
right.
There is that, and I think it's interesting when he does have a moment to reveal like what what Christmas was like at his house, and they all kind of question whether or not he's telling the truth. And it's like I was like, well, how much would that suck if you actually this is me being honest for a change, and I'm opening
people
up
don't believe me,
and they don't believe me, and so I think there's a lot more going on there, which makes him stand out the most. And I agree, he commands like the screen every time he's on. He also has the most fun lines. I mean, he has a lot to say and do. Definitely the less of the straight characters compared to the rest of them. He really gets to go all out. I know a lot of what he did was improv. Some of it was stuff that John Hughes wrote, and it's like a combination of the two of them kind of forming that character, but he certainly owns it. And I actually believe that by the end of it, and it's funny because like I want to ask you this about the whole discussion they have about like whether or not they'll be friends after all this. I do believe that he connects with them like by the end of it. Like he's not just kind of like going through the motions. So I believe who we meet in the beginning is who he is, rough around the edges, and then by the end of it, he kind of lets that guard down a bit, and that's just a testament of how good Judd Nelson was in the role. I think that he was able to do all that. But I do love that moment because like I remember when I watched it when I was younger, and every time I watch it now, even though there's a lot of like really serious stuff that happens in those discussions, the thing I could relate to the most as a high school student though is with if I were to meet be around a group of people that like, oh, you kind of connecting with, but you didn't really know you would, and you're in this kind of interesting, very unique situation. Like, what would happen after all that's over? Like, if you saw me walking down the hall, would you say hi? Will we be friends? And that part still stays with me because I think it's just so true of like what you would think if you're that age. Like, hey, we're having this like great moment together, but will that change? Once we're out of Saturday detention and then it's Monday and we're back at school, and what are you going to say? And I love that it goes back and forth where they think Claire's kind of being a bitch because she basically insinuates that like, hey, she might be like type like Andrew because like it makes sense for them to because he's a jock and she's who she is. And when they get mad at her, like I love that she calls it out, like like what would you say? Like basically implying to Bender that like you would basically insinuate that you were like doing me to like insinuate to your friends like that's why you're hanging out with me. So I love that moment. I kind of want to know what you thought about like that kind of exchange that they all had with each other.
Well, that whole exchange, it's like towards the end. I know it was a lot of improv and it was quite a long sequence. And I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly that John Hughes, like that was a big moment where he just let the camera roll and pretty much let the characters come up with what they're going to come up with. And I love because we spent pretty much the whole Saturday with them and they've all come in as one person and they've bonded throughout the day. And now it's like group therapy session time, essentially, as the movie's wrapping up. And sort of who they were when they came in starts to come out again after they realize that, this day isn't going to last forever. And we're going to go back to who we are before we walked in the doors on the Saturday. So I like that it doesn't necessarily unravel everything from the day, but we do get a glimpse of what life is going to be like after they're done in detention today. So I thought it was a really great scene. I think Brian's like naive sort of interpretation of their new relationships when that comes out, when he's genuinely upset that at the notion that they're going to go their separate ways and
when he
not
calls her
going to be bonded.
and like
exactly. That was a really poignant moment for me because like he is such an innocent, naive person that I think is a glass half full type of character and thinks that they're all going to be friends going forward. So when Claire and Bender sort of poke at how unlikely that is, and his reaction to it was like a highlight of the movie for me. Because that was a big sequence that I sort of like was a little gray on going in. I didn't exactly remember much from that sequence. So watching that play out again was great. And and I think Molly Ringwald really shines in that sequence too, where she just tells it how it is, which again was not very much like what she was like earlier in the movie, where she was, I think, happy to sit there and not say anything until the movie really gets going and the characters are forced to spend the day together. But she really reflects as her true self in that scene too, and kind of like what Bender was trying to get out of her throughout the movie, just tells it how it is, sticks up for herself. And does it come across as conceited? Yeah, but it's also not untrue.
Yeah, because I remember I had a friend that felt like, oh, like it feels like she didn't learn anything, and I was like, I think she did, but I think she also is being very realistic about like what the relationships would be, and I don't think she's doing it in a bitchy way or a way to be mean. She's just being honest. Like I don't think she's taking anything away from like the moments they're having together in that room, but like she is being very honest about like what things will be like once they leave. And I think she plays that really well, where she's not being a bitch. Like she's just like, this is what I think. And I think everyone kind of honest like goes through that question true to character. Like I love that Ali Sheedy's like basically says the kind of friends I had wouldn't mind, if we were seen together. And like, it makes sense for a character like hers. And I, like you said, I love that Brian's a little bit more naive to it, like thinking that they're going to be all best friends by the time they go back to school on Monday. It's very like true to character for each person, how they react to the question of like what happens once they leave Saturday detention. So like I always push back on the notion that like, particularly Claire didn't learn anything. I think she did. I think she
I agree.
Very much like I think she very much did. I just think she was just honest about what the the high school hierarchy was. And like, it's stupid now that we're grown, but like there definitely was a high school hierarchy at the time. For certain people, like, can't be seen with this person, gotta do this. Like it was dumb. I mean, it all made sense in high school, and we thought it was like the end of the world if like we didn't like go by it. But like
Right.
It's definitely something that felt more important in the moment when you're living it. So like
Definitely.
I think that scene was very much written honestly, and I do love learning that during that he just let them go. I also wonder if you're letting actors go, if they're professional enough to be like, hey, like we're talking in character, or like if it ever feels personal, if it
Personal,
gets kind of
yeah.
mean, like like how that must feel, because it gets pretty personal for a lot of them. But I don't know, they seem all pretty mature enough to understand like they were playing roles and all that. So um do want to ask you though, because everyone kind of has the in the circle moment, everyone's has their serious like why do they end up here and like what they're going through, right? And then Brian's is played to be serious, and you find out that like they think he tried to commit suicide, and like and he what did you bring a handgun? And he's like, no, it's a flare gun. And then it turns into like a moment of levity and a joke. And I want to ask you if you thought that was right to play that moment for levity and for jokes, or did he kind of deserve his own little moment to be taken seriously? Did that take that anything away from his kind of confessional for you?
I guess I would say no, because I didn't even really consider that until you brought it up, that they like the seriousness of like the implications of him bringing a gun to school and then playing it off as a joke. No, I didn't really stand out to me while I was watching it. I didn't really notice or consider that. I do think that the moment felt very genuinely, I don't know about like outright like knee slapping funny, but like it broke the tension as that
Right.
story goes, and we find out, okay, it wasn't a real, he brought a flare gun that went off in his locker. And I
Okay.
think just considering, I know that Brian has like all the characters have their own issues, but like for Brian's concern to be that he got an F in shop class and that was his result, and like just it felt very true to his character. Like that is something that would happen to like the nerdy archetype, that like of course like his plan would foil itself in such dramatic fashion where the flare gun goes off in his locker. No, I thought it came across as okay, but I'd be interested in that conversation because I'd never really considered that.
Yeah, it was something I just like. I think I noticed like in the last couple times I watched it, where everyone, and I guess it is still a serious thing. Like he brought, even though it was a flare gun, he bought something to school because he intended to use it, and he was so upset. And I think like the funny part of it is that he's so nerdy and doesn't really understand, that he would bring a flare gun. And I'm not saying that the moment is ruined by the fact that it turns in like. I love Emilio Estevez's laugh because like he's the first one to kind of burst out laughing, and they have to like dial it back. It's like, oh wait, no, it's still serious. And then they all kind of fall into laughing about it. I was like, a part of me was like, okay, maybe that Roman was written because they maybe needed levity to break the tension, like you said, because it was so serious. But then I was like, does that take anything away from like him having his moment to really explain why he was there and what he's going through? Like, did that really, take anything away from it? I don't think it does entirely. And I guess you do need that moment of like laughter to kind of like, because it is like a really heavy, long scene. That you need it. But it does like, I don't think he gets shortchanged. I hate to say it this way, but he is the only one that doesn't get paired off with anyone.
Yeah, true.
I guess he does write the letter, and like the letter, it's because he's and I still love the way that Molly Ringwald delivers this, because it can go either way, where she's like trying to like get him to write it because she doesn't really want to write it, and she doesn't think the rest of them should write it, and she's trying to like give him like almost like a backhanded comment, like you're the smartest one here, so like like you should write it. It's written, it's like performed in a way where she does mean like she doesn't want to, but she does mean that I think you're the smartest person here and that you should write it. And I think that's hard to play, and she plays it pretty well both ways. But I guess he gets to be the smartest guy, and he does write the most poignant thing that kind of sets off the end of the movie.
True.
But he really does kind of get like the shaft a bit. Doesn't, I mean, I guess there's there's 5 of them, so there's an odd number of people. So he can't really be paired off with anyone. But it's that notion that like the nerd doesn't really nerd has to do all the smart stuff, and that's what they're good at. I mean, I guess it's a stereotype that exists for a reason, but if you do go by the notion that he is the smartest guy and he does get to write this thing that really speaks for all of them, then like maybe that is all his character needs at the end, to kind of be the universal voice for the group. So I guess that is a solid like little notch for that character to have, that he really becomes the voice for their entire day
Right.
and what they kind of experience and like what they feel like they should explain to Vernon at the end. So yeah, I guess maybe you can look at it that way. That
Yeah.
he does have his
Just
own little
also
part
just to piggyback on that conversation about like the levity from the gun conversation is, I do think that moment led to like a genuine catharsis for Brian's character, and that because he was able to laugh it off at the ridiculousness of it, I do think that
yeah.
adds legitimacy to how that scene unfolds, because it does seem like he is better for having addressed it and
Yeah.
lament about his grade. So the fact that conversation like goes the way it does and they sort of poke fun at it,
Yeah.
I think that's thinking about that. I think that makes it okay, but that's my interpretation of
Yeah.
it.
No, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And I just wanted to ask, because like it was the first time I really noticed. I was like, oh, like is it okay to like kind of not turn the situation the joke? Like, because like it is like the implication is that he brought that to hurt himself or do something.
Right.
And so it is a very serious thing. And I was like, does it really take away from the moment by bringing down the serious thing by turning that moment into a button for a joke? But it's played well to the point where, like you said, even he laughs it off and it's like, you know, has his own moment with it. So, you know, it was just something I thought about when I was watching it. Like, if it was okay to turn something so serious into a moment to have a laugh, but I guess it's only like it's like a chuckle. It's not really like a guffaw. Like it turns like a big joke.
Right.
It's like
Exactly.
almost like, you know, it does. Like you said, it does break the kind of tension between everyone. I also love in that scene too that everyone isn't all kumbaya with each other by the time they start having their like kind of circle moment with each other. Because I love when he says, because I laugh, because you need to laugh a bit, when he basically says like, do you know what kind of idiots take shop? And he's just like, I take shop. He's like, oh, kind of like it like you kind of like need that too, because it's,
yes,
you know, they're still learning each other and like it's
right.
not all perfect by then. But yeah, that's something I wanted to bring out. I thought it was interesting. I think Brian is the most for a lot of people, they think they probably would relate to him the most, because a lot of people can relate to being like nerdy and misunderstood. But I think you kind of learn. I mean, I guess you do learn a bit about what you need to during that whole flare gun discussion, but it seems like you learn the least about him in that fivesome compared to like everyone else. Like even more than Allison, who like doesn't even say much like the first like 45 minutes of the movie or so. Like I think you get a lot about her by the,
even though we don't learn as much, it does seem like her character from the onset is ambiguous, mysterious. We learn that she's kind of an unreliable narrator. Like we can't exactly believe everything she says. So I think that the fact that we don't understand truly a lot about her is still fitting for her character. And yeah, Brian, in a sense, I'd say he's not necessarily one-dimensional, but his issues are very much tied into his archetype, where he's concerned about his grades, and you know, there's pressure on him at home too to do well, and I think we learn just enough about them that goes beyond what we expect from the beginning, but not much more. But I think it's okay. All in all, it doesn't. I kind of still compare all their characters and where they end up equally as to how they came in, but.
Yeah. You said something earlier that I want to touch on before I forget.
Yeah.
Is that you found yourself relating a bit more to the older characters, not just the teenagers. And I was wondering like what it was about them that you kind of found a bit more relatable this time around. Because I think even when I watched it for this, I was still like, the principal still seems kind of mean. Like, I mean, I guess I get it with Bender, but like some of the stuff, some of the stuff he says to the other ones are like, I don't know if that would fly at school today. Like, I don't know. Like, it's still, I don't know, but I am interested to see like what I think the gender is also a good sounding board for like kind of being a middle ground for the teenagers and the adults, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So he was actually one of their own. Him and Vice Principal Vernon are really the two adult characters that we get in this movie. And I think Carl, the janitor, is fascinating because like on my first few watches of this movie, I really don't take away anything from his character, but on this watch, there's a really small detail at the beginning of the movie where it's showing like different shots of the hallway of the school, and we see like a composite of like previous grad classes, and we see there's a man of the year and a photo of a student from a few like decades prior, and it's of who ends up being the janitor of the school. And I think that just like goes to show, like, yeah, at one point he's still working at the school as an adult. At one point, he was just like any other student there that thought he was going to go on. He had his own pressures of life and school and thought he was going to go on to probably do much different things, and wound up having a pretty unremarkable life still in the same place working at the school. And while our main characters are so concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow and dealing with the pressures of today and their future, I thought that was more realistic approach. And his line too about being the eyes and ears of the school and seeing what goes on when nobody thinks that he's there, listening, and how he goes through their lockers. I thought that was a pretty influential moment for a character that is hardly there.
Yeah, I also love Brian's like shocked look on his face when they bring up the whole like I go through your lockers thing, and he's just like dumbfounded, like like that's not good.
Exactly. No.
Yeah.
And then Vernon too. I think I had a couple of things written down on my notes for this movie that are not in front of me at the moment, that I had to contribute. But he's definitely written to be like this antagonist, but I think he's much more relatable. Like as I get older and watch this movie, that he sees the problem, like especially like his rivalry with Bender. Like I think that he has turned into this person that is malicious and like doesn't deal with things professionally, and is if what he does to Bender in that scene where he like locks him in the closet and like berates him, would be the end of his career, and he would face like absolute like, you know, people wouldn't believe it. But I think what started, he's just so fed up with Bender, but I think he did at one point genuinely recognize that, you know, Bender's throwing his life away, and then everything he does to punish him, I think at one point was supposed to be rehabilitative, and eventually, you know, Bender seems to have no concern for his future, and I think Vernon now considers him just sort of a lost cause. And I think his character is really an amalgamation of his frustration at seeing, you know, generations and generations of students come and go through the school. He wastes their lives, exactly. And so he's so frustrated and angry at Bender, who seems to be this representative of all of this wasted potential. And I think that displays itself in his character really pointedly. Very, you know, extreme side of it, but I just got a lot more out of his character than just being the evil vice principal, which I think is an archetype that we see in Ferris Bueller. Maybe a little bit played up more comically, but I think there was definitely some more nuance in Vernon's character in this movie than there is in Ferris Bueller's principal character. But there's a couple other things that I can't exactly remember off the top of my head that I thought were great character moments. He's also just an adult that has to dedicate his Saturday to, you know, babysitting these delinquent kids and detention. So I think, you know, him not wanting to be there and him being pissed off at having to come into the room and discipline these people all the time, these kids, is relatable. Like watching it from the perspective of the high school characters. Well, I'd watched this previously. Yeah, you think, hey, here's the guy that's come to interrupt the fun and make sure that they're there, you know, being punished. But watching it and considering him as an adult that's there to do a job, and, you know, is upset about him, he's also sacrificing his Saturday in detention too.
Yeah, like he doesn't want to be there either. Like,
no, of course not, right?
Yeah, he'd rather be somewhere else. And I think the whole scene, the closet scene where he's berating Bender, I think you can take it one way as like that is excessively cruel. You would be fired.
And it is, on the other hand, sure.
On the other hand, though, he probably is doing it because, you know, Bender's parents haven't done that to him. It seems like there's like a lack of discipline in Bender's house, and like I think he's trying to. And I also think when you're an authoritative figure and you get frustrated at someone who is wasting their potential, that I think sometimes you can get a little angry and you might say things that may not be the best things to say, but it's coming from a really good place because you're so frustrated that it's like you have so much you can offer the world, but you're not utilizing it at all. And,
exactly.
And honestly, in the simplest of terms, someone like an adult figure should react that way to Bender because he's really kind of combative with, you know, an authority figure as if he's on equal footing with him, and Bender's not. He's a student, and the way he interacts with Vernon is very much like he's talking to an adult. And even though it's cooler for us to relate to all the teen characters in the movie and be like, oh, like the principal's an asshole. You're right. I think growing up is kind of realizing that he's not. And even though he's also rough around the edges, he probably has the best intentions for everyone in that room, but he probably is a little broken from watching, like you said, kid after kid after kid leave that school and not utilize their full potential. So it'd be interesting to find out if John Hughes wrote that character to be like a one-note villain, or if there was just more nuance there, like kind of like the way we're picking apart at it.
Right. I definitely think there's nuance there for sure. That stuff you just don't consider maybe upon rewatch or as you get older and your perspective changes on the movie. But regardless of if it's intentional or if it's just stuff you notice later in life, I don't know. But undeniably, I think there's way more nuance to the vice principal character than I had at least given it on my first few watches.
Yeah, and honestly, hearing you say it, like, kind of brought that a bit out of me, because like I do know when I was a teenager, though, I was very much like, this guy's an asshole. Did not want to even like look into how he could be right in his treatment of them on Saturday detention. But you're right. As you get older, like, he doesn't want to. He could be doing other things with his Saturday. He doesn't want to be there as much as they don't want to be there. So yeah, I think it is really interesting to think of it that way, and it's cool that like he was able to write an adult character. And I honestly, the janitor character, even though he doesn't have a lot to do, I think kind of is like a middle ground for like between, like, he understands the kids, but he's an adult himself, and like, you know, he tries to understand like what they're going through, but also is like, you know, he, like I said, he's an adult as well, and like can't really fully identify with them, but understands like, hey, like, I see both sides of this argument. Like that whole conversation he has with Vernon is very interesting too. Like they have a really good exchange like with each other. And yeah, again, you said it is more nuanced than maybe people will give it credit for. And I'm glad that he didn't write those two adult characters as being one note, even though when I was younger, I kind of looked at them. And I think it's just because it's all how Paul Gleason plays him. He's very gruff and very like, he is mean on the surface, but he certainly like, he probably cares, but it's just like he doesn't, he's tired of caring, I guess.
I think
like,
he's tired of caring.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah. He's just like, I have hit my bottom here. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I do kind of wonder, just like beyond the movie, like how he felt about reading that letter though at the end. Like if it got to him at all, or like, because it, it's, it is even though it's short and sweet, it is pretty well written, and like I love the way it kind of caps off. I mean, I love how you get like a piece of it at the beginning, and I love how you get like the full extent of it at the end, and then you have each one of them say what they are. Like,
yes,
really well. I thought it was really well done. But I am curious as to like I wonder if he understood what they were trying to say.
I wonder if it was shot him reading the letter and his reaction, and maybe it just didn't make the final cut, or if maybe John Hughes just wanted to leave it ambiguous and leave Vernon as a one-note antagonist that didn't care. I'm not sure which ending I would like better. I do think it would be more like classic to have a shot of him reading the letter and like understanding and sort of like accepting it. But I think I do like the ambiguity. I'm not really sure, but yeah, I do like it's a great note to end the movie on, like with Brian's letter, and like you said, each character stating their own archetype, like in their voice, was classic.
Yeah. Were you a big fan, like when you first heard the "Don't You Forget About Me" song by Civil Minds?
Yeah. The soundtrack in this movie is incredible. I didn't realize that growing up, I was familiar with the song, but like not familiar. Like I'd heard it. I didn't necessarily associate it to the movie. Even after watching The Breakfast Club, I didn't realize like if it was written for the movie or not. But like undeniably now, I associate that song with the movie. But yeah, it is, the whole soundtrack in the movie is fantastic.
Yeah, they said that John Hughes was very good at like needle drops in his movies. Like he understood like music as well, so he knew exactly where to put songs in movies and like where to like how they would like enhance scenes. They said that he was always thinking about that even while he was writing stuff. Like how can he like incorporate, and like you kind of get like if you watch more of his, if you watch like 16 Candles or Pretty in Pink, Weird Science, they all have like very good needle drops where it's just not music for the sake of music. Like they all
Right.
kind of, the music just enhances each scene that it's in. And I think that's another like example of him being like in the zone when it came to like what young people wanted, and like and understanding like what they desired from their movies. And you said something earlier about the 80s aesthetic. There's something about this movie and a lot of his other movies that feel just so cool, I guess. I mean, even cooler than like some of the stuff that came out when I was growing up in the 90s. Like he really understood like from top to bottom what young people wanted from their movies, and that
Yes,
is
he did.
from how these people looked, from how they were written, how they were perceived, the music. Like he really like knew all of that stuff. And I mean, unless maybe he was just a guy that never fully grew up, like maybe he kind of like was kind of stuck in a certain time warp, if you will, where he
perpetually young.
But I do think it's cool that from what I've read is that even though he understood youth culture and wrote it well, he never treated his cast like kids. Though he treated them as if they were equals, like they were like adults just like him. And that could be really good especially on a set like this, because like it's pretty heavy stuff they have to do. There's a lot of funny stuff for sure, but there's a lot of heavy stuff that they have to get involved with as well. So
absolutely. And I love that this movie is rated R. I think it lets this movie be everything that it could be, like just the realistic dialogue, the swearing, the subject matter. I think this movie would be hampered by being anything less than rated R. So, and I actually had kind of forgotten, like I never really considered its rating when I plopped it in my Blu-ray player and watched it. Like I didn't remember necessarily like some of the big dialogue moments, and I really wasn't thinking about it. And then I saw rated R. I was like, oh, how refreshing. Like we're going to get actual dialogue of how teenagers would speak to each other when they're in a room together. And it led to some of the great moments, like when Vernon closes the door after giving Bender like that 2 months worth of detentions, and he screams like, fuck you. Like, it's such an awesome moment. Just wouldn't have had that if it wasn't rated R. So
I kind of forgot about the aggressive F-bomb that Emilio Estevez drops, and it's the derogatory term for someone who's gay. He enunciates it, and I was like,
there's an R word in there too.
Yeah, there was like in the 80s and 90s, man. Like it's just, I bet it's something that you can't really, I guess, fault, because like that's it was normal back then, I guess.
That's right.
There was one thing that was brought to me about John Hughes movies, and I pushed back on it, even though some people don't agree with it. He, and I guess in like more recent reassessments of his work, is that his movies are very, very white. Like there aren't a lot of like, if any, like cultural representation at all in his movies. And whether or not I thought that was a bad thing, or if like other, Black people think that's a bad thing. And I never really thought it was. I think he wrote what he knew, and I think this is what he knew. And I never really took offense to the fact that, like, I think it'd be more offensive just to throw a random Black character in the cast just because you had to.
Right.
That would be because that would be coming from like a place of like, it wouldn't be authentic. It would just be like,
disingenuous.
Yeah. But I know it's like a bit. It's been like a big reassessment of his work lately, but like I don't think it was never meant on his end to be offensive, or to not showcase representation. Like this is what, like when you're a writer, they tell you to write what you know, and if that's what
exactly
this is the world that he knew, then like I fully respect that and understand that. So like I push back on that a bit, because I don't think everything has to be an issue of like everything needs to be represented through every piece of work. Some things are just written as is, and I think that's what he did. I don't think he was trying to shut any particular race or anything out of his work.
Exactly. Like I would agree completely. Like obviously, like different perspective. It's something that guilty of not even really thinking about that while watching the movie. But I agree with your take on it. I think that is a very great take, and I completely agree that I don't think he was like ignorant to other cultures or anything. Like you said, he's just writing what he knew.
Yeah, and I also think it's important what you just said is to say that, like, it's not something that you notice. It's not even something that I noticed growing up watching these movies. So I think it really is like a testament to how well he wrote, and like making these problems universal for everyone that watched it. That I never really paid attention to the fact that like, oh, like everyone is like so white, but I never really like, it wasn't something that bothered me. I think it's just like the power of his writing, and I think that has a lot to do with like why so many different people, a lot, talk to any race or gender, whatever, they love his movies, and especially if you talk to like people who happen to have grown up in the 80s when these came out, they how they fondly talk about like that experience of like having these movies and like these actors and all that. Like it really meant like a lot to them, because at the time, I guess before he did it, a lot of people weren't writing about what young people were going through at the time. They said he is pretty much one of the first people to really tackle like teen films. Like, let's write about like what these guys are going through, what these girls are going through. It wasn't really an interest to a lot of studios that wanted to do it until he kind of pushed it and it became successful. And then he made a lot of them, and then a lot of people wanted to make their own version of that, and that carried on through. Hell, I guess even now. I mean, I guess like
I would say,
yeah. So we all have it in different ways now, but like he really understood that young people had a voice too, and like they deserve to be heard, and they deserve to see themselves on something on the big screen and feel understood. So kudos to him for doing that. I mean, even though he didn't live long, I mean, 59 is really young to pass away, but like he certainly left his mark on I guess that generation and generations to come. And for me, it is with this movie. I mean, I know you love Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and I don't know if it's your favorite one. I don't know if I really asked you of what you've seen, which is your favorite, but this one still sticks with me as
I need to see.
Like
this is definitely. I mean, those are the only two John Hughes movies that I've seen that he's directed. Anyway, I've seen some movies that he's written, which is a shame. Saying it out loud, I'm like, oh man, I need to get on his because I've Planes, Trains, and Automobiles has been on my list. I think that's going to be like a Thanksgiving watch, because I love Due Date, which is like essentially a remake of that movie from 2010.
Yeah, pretty much.
But I mean, I've only seen Ferris Bueller once. I think on that, just comparing like rewatches, I think I got more enjoyment out of Ferris Bueller. But it was also, it was new to me at that time, so maybe I'm giving it the edge. But I mean, I've seen The Breakfast Club, like I said, 3 or 4 times now, and I think I got to give it its respect. And obviously, it's a movie that I've returned to more, so I'd say I would give it that. But on that note, you did tease earlier in the episode about your rating. I think now would be a great time to hear how you sum up the movie and what you think of it. I think I have a guess.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty obvious what I'm going to give it. I mean, it's my favorite movie of his. It still stands out as, I mean, not just like when I think about teen movies in general, like whatever generation they come from or decade they come from. I think this is the quintessential like teen movie, I think. And because it tackles like so many different issues and does so fairly well in a relatively short amount of time. I think the acting is universally great from everyone involved. I'm gonna 5-star it. Even though I do have issues, like you said, with like the whole like Ali Sheedy stuff at the end and like the Molly Ringwald and Bender stuff at the very end of the movie. There's so much good that happens before that I can't really ding it for it. Like I feel a lot when I watch it, and like I'm not gonna let like a minute or two worth of time on screen ruin like the impact of the overall movie, which is why I won't like make it a lower score. I think it's like pretty perfect. And yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna 5-star it all the way.
Nice. That was my initial inclination as well, and that's what I was guessing you were going to give it a rating. And I think previously I would have given it. You know what? Maybe I will 5-star it as well. I was a little bit indecisive. I was not going to go lower than 4.5, but where I would like maybe consider taking half a point away would be the Ali Sheedy stuff, and even the Bender and Claire relationship. I do get stuck on as like just a little black mark, but I guess maybe I would make up that half a mark with the appreciation I get out of Vernon's character and Carl. So like it's still giving me like things to appreciate and different details that I didn't relate to on previous watches. So I'm still getting more out of this movie throughout the years, and I think that kind of makes up for that. And it is a really small detail. So I think I'll meet you at 5 stars. It is like the quintessential high school movie. It's an amazing 80s movie. It's an amazing teen movie. It's super rewatchable. It holds up 40 years later. Like the soundtrack, I think pairs with the movie like perfectly as good as it could. And ultimately, yeah, there's no other detractions I would have from this movie. So, I think you convinced me. I'll keep it out of 5 as well. Like, it is a perfect movie.
Yeah, I mean, like, dude, I mean, like I said, like I went a little bit while watching, like, oh, are those 2 moments enough for me to bring it down like a half score or whatever? Because that part of the movie hasn't aged well, but I mean, it's like 2 things out of like 98
Yeah,
other great things. So I'm not gonna
exactly. Also, it's a
really
product of
fault
its
for that.
time too, and I want to look at it from that way, not necessarily
Right.
how modern society has impacted it. Like, I try to watch it in the vein of the 80s and judge it for that. So keeping that in
Right.
mind, that kind of lessens that
Yeah.
impact of those 2 aspects for me.
And it's cool to see how it's influenced stuff. I mean, even that we have today. I mean, if you look at The Faculty, Kevin Williamson wrote, like he really took those characters and really based a lot of that on The Breakfast Club. Like Stokely in that is pretty much Ali Sheedy. Jordana Brewster is basically Molly Ringwald. Like Josh Hartnett is basically Bender. So like he really
Okay.
Kevin Williamson really copied that for that movie. I guess he would be the closest thing to the 90s voice that we had, even though I wouldn't say it was as expansive as John Hughes's, but he
Right.
certainly tried. I think,
It's a good
I don't know if you
comparison.
remember the scene from Go where Timothy Olyphant is messing with Kitty Holmes' character, whose name is Claire, and he's like pushing her to like, he's like, answer the question, Claire, answer the question. And she's like, oh yeah, Breakfast Club, I get it. Very funny. So there's like a lot of stuff that it did
Oh, yeah.
influence. There's a whole Dawson's Creek episode where they are in detention together, and it's very much again influenced by that. So it
Right.
certainly influenced a lot of things down the line. I think that's another testament of like how important the movie is.
Yeah.
It hasn't been quite imitated and done as well.
Right.
They certainly have tried, but I don't know. I think it stands the test of time. Even like fucking 40 years later, it's crazy. Like I said, I think young people today can watch it and get something from it. I think you can like
Right.
have a
I
teenager
agree.
watch it and they would fully get it. And
This one
again,
I would show any future kids that I have without a doubt when they're of age to watch it. Like, I think it's a like
yeah,
quintessential coming of age movie that like stands the test of time. Anybody should see. Anybody should, even though it's got vulgar language and some pretty adult like themes and talking points. I think it's important
yeah,
for people to watch this movie, especially while they're in high school, at least, even maybe even younger. I don't know. I think it says a lot about appreciating where other people come from and how
yeah,
not to be too wrapped up in your own problems and experiences, that you shouldn't discount what other people are going through, even if it seems like they've got everything put together. It's has a lot of timeless humanistic themes in this movie that I think you would benefit from watching. So it absolutely has my seal of approval, and I will can't wait to watch it again. I'll probably put some more time between it, just so it stays fresh. But I will probably be watching this movie forever.
yeah. And apparently, I only have the Blu-ray of this. Apparently, there's a Criterion Collection edition of this,
Oh, I
and
didn't know it was in the Criterion.
50 minutes of like deleted and extended scenes. So like, I think I'll be purchasing that now because I kind of want to see what those are
Nice.
because I
Yeah,
didn't know.
100%.
Yeah. So like for those that want physical media, that is available to you. And yeah, that is episode 228 of Back to the Box Resort, where we covered the Breakfast Club for its 40th anniversary, and that was your listeners' pick. Thank you guys for picking it. You did the heavy lifting for us because I really wanted to do it, and we kind of figured that you guys would want to do that one. And there's a lot of ulterior motives with like putting the 2 movies together.
For sure.
Even though I thought Sugar Island would get more votes, but it seems like like we said, the Breakfast Club is universally well liked. So I'm glad you guys picked it. We have to do our listeners pick for March. We know the one we're doing for sure is Final Destination. That will be my pick, and we're going to be doing that with the Return, Revenge, Resurrection guys who have been on the show before, talking horror movies with us. They wanted to do Final Destination with us, so we're going to do that. Jackson still has to pick his for the month of March. And then he has to pick one for you listeners to choose from, and then I have to pick one for the listeners to choose from. So we'll be getting that up fairly soon. It looked pretty bleak. The bottom of the list is actually pretty decent. And I think I know which one I'm going to pick for the listeners one. And
Okay,
hopefully
nice.
you guys, hopefully I don't need it to go my way, but if it did, that'd be great.
Okay. Hopefully we can get one of your boxes in there too. So I can't wait to see what it is. Yes, we'll get that out of there soon.
Yeah. And as always, thank you guys all for listening. We are going to be doing a Oscars recap here pretty soon. So that'll be a little bit of news that we've kind of missed out on. And in addition to that, like we said, we have more anniversary episodes, more things that we already do our director showcase very soon. A lot of something we're going to catch up on now that both of our lives are a little more less stressful because we were both pretty busy. But now we can kind of get back into the swing of things and doing this more weekly. If you like what you hear, please listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, wherever you listen to podcasts. Overcast is another one. That's where David Park listens to our show. But there's also the Playlist Studio app, and we want you to download their app from either the Google Play Store or the iOS Store because they are very good to us and they treat us very well. They are also very happy that we haven't missed a week in a very long time. So I don't think we actually have missed that week. Yeah, the streak has been, I think, good since like even before you were on it. I don't think we actually missed a week of episodes. So we're going to keep that going for you as well. We also have a YouTube channel where we promise we will be putting on more content now that things are less busy, less stressful. We'll be doing some more short form content to add to that. So please find us there at Back to the Blockbuster and subscribe so you can be ready for those things as well. Jackson, as always, thank you for discussing movies with me. This was actually a really good overall conversation, not just about the movie itself, but just about like how the movie made us feel, I guess.
Absolutely. A pleasure.
Very easy to talk about. Yeah, very easy to talk about one of the greats. So thank you for that as well. And I will be seeing you pretty soon to talk about the very tame, very safe Academy Awards that that aired on Sunday.
They certainly were. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Peace out.
Dear Mr. Vernon, we accept the fact that we had to sacrifice a whole Saturday in detention for whatever it was we did wrong. But we think you're crazy to make us write an essay telling you who we think we are. And you see us as you want to see us. In the simplest terms, with the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each one of us is a brain and an athlete
and a basket case, a princess
and a criminal. Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club.
Don't